share your heart. And I am so excited to have my co-host on this site today. And this is Patrice E Clarke. How are you today?
I am doing great. I'm excited to be here. It's a privilege. Thank you so much for having me.
Not a problem. So tell me, who is Patrice E Clarke, the international dancer, the Christian, the woman of God, this evangelist? I don't know, to be, or is she an evangelist? So, so who is Patrice?
Well, Patrice Clarke is a little island girl raised in Nassau, Bahamas. I've been living in Boca Raton, Florida for 10 years. I am a dancer, a teacher, a coach. I teach at Virtue's Dance Production in Boca Raton, Florida. I teach intermediate and adult dancers. I'm also a dance leader at my church, Jesus People Proclaim International Ministries, where I am the dance leader and the performing arts director.
Okay. Well, from my understanding, when we called in, you called me and we did a little briefing over the phone. You have not always been a dancer, because some things you didn't always, well, I would say you weren't always so happy, correct?
No, I wasn't so happy because, I just felt like life was hard. It was difficult growing up for me in the islands, and because I was raised by my grandmother, and she was a beautiful woman. I loved her so dearly, and she was a stranger. She sewed, and so she would always make me these beautiful garments. I always had to be the little perfect little lady. But I was given to my grandmother by my parents.
Okay.
My mother was an absent mother. My father was an absent father. And not because they didn't love me, maybe because they thought that was the best thing for me. But I did not understand that.
Okay.
I couldn't comprehend why I couldn't be with my mother nor my father, because they had other kids that they raised. And I was raised with my grandmother. And yes, my grandmother loved me, but that did not stop the rejection that I felt from not being raised by my parents. I felt abandoned by them. And I think what made it worse is my mother didn't do a lot of calling. Even though I knew who she was not really there present. And my father was not present. He's now deceased. And I had one time I asked my father, I said, Dad, why did you give me up? And he said, well, he was raised by his grandmother, and so he didn't think like it was a big issue. But we reconciled, and he's gone on to be with the Lord, and my mom is still on the earth. I mean, we have a decent relationship. I love her dearly, and we've reconciled, but my life is difficult. And when my grandmother passed at the age of 15, I had to live with my aunt and uncle. My mother did not assume responsibility for me. And so that was another form of rejection. So here I was, this teenager growing up, missing my grandmother, but not having a mother. My aunt was a beautiful person who raised me. She provided every need, but there was still that void. And I guess because growing up I was molested,
What age was that?
It started when I was, I think, my first encounter was at least by the age of 5. And it was not by one person, but different people. And even though I knew it was wrong, I just didn't know how to express what was wrong. Sometimes felt right, in other words. And I didn't know how to express that I didn't want it, because at one point you want to be loved, you don't want to be rejected, because all you know is rejection. And if I say no, then that's another form of rejection. They're going to reject me.
bá gbọ́ pé o sọ fẹ́ nìkan kan tá a ṣe ló kúkú mọ̀ nínú ìṣe àwọn òbí ẹ̀ o gbọ́dọ̀ sọ fún yẹn o wọ́n sọ fún yẹn o. Ti tó.
So let's go back. Now you said you were raped and molested by multiple people.
Right.
And it's from my understanding these were actually family members.
Some of them were family members, like one was my mom's brother.
Okay.
And, they were like people who were just not necessarily family members, who we call family members as well,
And now, I believe one of them had a big impact on your life. And take me back to the day because you lost memory of actually what happened to you.
Yes.
Okay, so explain that to me.
Well, sometimes I think because it's a difficult situation, and because, like, say, for example, it has happened so many times, I used to black out. I was just going to this zone where I detached myself from my body, from the pain or what was happening to me. I just went to another place. And going to that other place, sometimes you just psych yourself out and forget. And I just forgot what happened. Like I was no longer there. It was just my body, but I was not present.
And how did they approach you? How did
sometimes,
first incident?
I was a little girl, and he just said, he wanted me to do something for him, and he was just giving me a treat, and I didn't know it was wrong, even though when it happened, I felt like something was wrong with it, and I wanted to tell my grandmother. I just I did not know how to tell her, because I was a very mature child. Even though I was like 5, 6, I was mature. I was raised by my grandmother. She raised us maturely, and so I was thinking, but she's gonna get mad at me, and then I'm gonna get punished, and so when I thought about it, I said, that's not a good idea, because I wanted to tell her, but I felt like it wasn't a good idea because I would get in trouble. So I kept it a secret, and I kept keeping it a secret.
Okay. And there was a funeral that took place. Explain that day where you had an encounter with one of your,
that was the very first person who molested me. It was my mother's funeral, and I did not remember, because when the person molested me, I was so young that I did not connect that was my mother's brother, because I had went to spend a summer with my mom when I was just a little girl, and I didn't know all of her people. Like I don't really know my mom's people like that, and so I just knew that this man molested me. And I was at the funeral. We were at the repast.
And you never had a face to put to the action.
Because I saw him that once and I never saw him again.
Okay.
And we had a repast, and I was at the funeral, and for some reason, he looked just familiar to me. And I was looking, I said, why does he look familiar to me? And he kept looking at me. I was like, he looks so familiar. Where do I know him from?
Yes.
And even though I knew he was family.
And how old were you at this time?
I was like 19.
Okay.
And even though I knew he was family, I just didn't know who he was. I knew they were related.
Okay.
And so when we at the house after the funeral, we were at the repast, and he said, and I looked at him, I said, you look familiar. Where do I know you from? And he said, you don't remember me? I was like, do I know you? Have we met? He said, yeah. I said, I know you're my uncle, but we have never met. I could swear we never met, because I think that was the first time I met my mother's brothers. She had 2 brothers, and that's the first time I met them. And so he was like, yeah, we met before. He said, you always used to make me happy. I was like, make you happy?
And I was like,
oh, it was you. And I said that to him.
and what was his reaction
Nothing.
at that point?
And I think I was in so much shock that I went to my brother, because my brother was raising my mom. He's my little brother. I said, did he live with mom at one point? And he's like, yes, he did. I said, oh, and I said, went to my mom. I said, Mom, did your brother live with you at one point? And she's like, yes, he did. I said, oh, that makes sense. And I was like, okay, it's time for me to go home. I want to go home.
Wow.
So I just left 3 passed.
So, I'm sorry, that choked me up just a little bit because I couldn't imagine being at 19 and to live my whole life not knowing. I knew something took place, but to finally encounter the one who changed my life forever, and his reaction is just nonchalant, like nothing ever took place at all. How did that affect your life after that point in your life?
Well, at that point, it really affected me that day, and I reached out to a older, mature Christian that day, just to like, look, I just found out who molested me because it messed me up. And she was like, well, look at it this way. It didn't happen every day. So I always felt like I had to be the big girl to suck up everything and just keep moving in life, which is not always the healthy thing to do.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, that happened, so that day I just moved on.
So what would you suggest to a victim who's out there, being that, in Sister Share Your Heart, we deal with a lot of women, children who are molested and raped, and then we become their support group at My Sisters Keep a Place of Refuge. How would you suggest to someone who's endured that type of pain and who's holding it in, how can they survive, a situation like that?
Okay, I would say the wise thing is not to hold it in, because then we incubate it, and it becomes like tumors. And I'll say this from personal experiences. I realized before I was even 30, I had fibroids, and I had a whole lot of them, and they were attached to my womb. But you know what? They were just bleeding issues, issues that I never dealt with. And my fibroids were so bad that I had to constantly get bags and bags and points of blood given, because it was just sucking all the blood out of me. So it was just it sucked the life out of me. So the thing is not to hold it, it's to express it. Find someone who you can confide in, who will listen to you, who will help you walk the process. Because the process is going to take prayer. It's going to take prayer, it's going to take worship. It's going to take seeking God's face.
So that's how your dance came in. You began to use.
Well, after my grandmother died, I always wanted to dance. But my grandmother was those Baptist Christians who did not at that point accept dance in the church. And then, of course, if you don't accept dance in the church, I was dancing to all the other reggae songs. And my grandma was like, "You cannot do that." She sent me to the altar. But I guess I went to this church. He's deceased now. His name is Dr. Miles Monroe. I went to visit their church in Nassau, Bahamas, where I lived at the time, and I saw their dance ministry. And immediately when I saw their dance ministry, I knew that was a part of my calling. And I said, okay, that is where I'm supposed to be. And I went home and I asked my aunt, I said, Auntie, can I switch churches? Can I join BFM? And she's like,
what is BFM?
It's Bahamas Faith Ministries.
Okay.
I think the name has changed to Dr. Miles Monroe Center now. But I was like, Auntie, can I join that church? And she said, okay, well, let me think about it. And so while she was thinking about it, I already joined the dance ministry. Because, that was just like, okay, she's going to say no. And first she said no. And I said, okay, well, I'm just going to go to prayer then. Because at that point, the dance ministry did a whole lot of praying. So I said, I'm just going to go to prayer. And I came back I think it was a month later. I said, look, I joined the dance ministry center now.